Thank you also for this room in this building. It's a spectacular room. When you come from Denmark, you feel very at home with in a space like this. Thank you for supporting our interior design industry through many, many years, of course. I've noticed something interesting over the past year or so. I've been doing this for a few years, and I've noticed that the bicycle is getting invited to cooler parties for every year that goes by. Just this year, I've spoken in the fantastic City Hall in Vienna, in the Scottish Parliament buildings in Edinburgh, at the Houses of Parliament in Westminster and London, and then now in a space like this. And I always think that the bicycle as transport, the humble bicycle, nowadays it deserves, spaces like this. Not some, subcultural eco-festival in some fringe town somewhere, but this is where the bicycle belongs. This is what we do. We do, with Copenhagenized Design Company, we advise cities and politicians and policymakers around the world in how to reestablish the bicycle as transport on the urban landscape. For example, we're designing the bicycle strategy for the city of Dublin, the city of Winnipeg in Canada. We work with the Norwegian Transport Ministry. We have great projects about putting bicycles into schools in Sao Paulo, in Brazil. And it's all about the bike, everything we do, a lot of communication as well, how to change this perception that the bicycle is only sport and recreation, but it can actually be used for transport, as it has done for almost 125 years. But today I'm going to talk about bicycle culture by design, bicycle urbanism, I call it. And I'm going to probably provoke some of you. I'm going to probably inspire some of you. Hopefully I'm going to do both at the same time. I can never be sure. But at the end of the day, I'm just a guy with some good ideas about how to make cities better. And I think that's a good thing. So, this way. Can I check my mails while I'm doing this? Okay, first of all, it's important to establish a baseline for what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to be mentioning the word bicycle quite a few times, and every time I do, I'd like it if you could get images in your head of the kind of things you would see in a city like Copenhagen, or Amsterdam, or even nowadays Paris, Barcelona, Dublin, Seville. Citizen cyclists, as I call them, using a bicycle for transport, just as a way of getting around their city. Fast-moving pedestrians, wearing the same clothes that they do on a bus or on a sidewalk. I don't regard myself as a cyclist at all. I kind of have made this important point in my little career here. I'm just a guy who happens to use a bicycle to get around in my city because it makes sense. It's the fastest way for me to get around. Now, I often say that we don't have bicycle culture at all in Copenhagen. Everybody comes to see our bicycle culture, but this is like a phrase that somebody else invented somewhere else. We don't go around in Copenhagen saying, "Hey, did you have a nice day in the bicycle culture today?" No, we just go to work or to the supermarket. So, and I often call what we have in Copenhagen. Am I doing it the wrong way? Down. There you go. I like to call it vacuum cleaner culture. In Copenhagen. So this is sort of a take on the logo we have in Copenhagen. I bike Copenhagen, but this is my logo. I vacuum clean Copenhagen. We all have a vacuum cleaner. We have all learned how to use it. We all use it every single day. We don't wave at other vacuum cleaning enthusiasts on the streets. We don't put on fancy clothes to vacuum. We don't give our vacuum cleaners names. We just use them. They are an important and an integral and very efficient tool for making our everyday lives easier, and that's really all there is to it. So, if you're going to come to Copenhagen, look out for the vacuum cleaners coming at you from all different directions. On this little journey into the future of urban mobility, a future where humans rank higher than machines, we have to go back to the future. Some of you may remember the film, Back to the Future, and I saw this film recently with my son and my daughter, and it's still a great film after all these years. I saw it in the cinema, so you can kind of figure out how old I am. And at the end of the film, my son noticed something very interesting. He said, "Daddy, when was this film made?" And I said, "Oh, well, it's 1985. And he says, "Okay, so the professor at the end of the film flies into the future in this time machine car and returns from 30 years in the future. And the car has been transformed into this fantastic flying machine that runs on coffee grounds and a Pepsi can and a banana peel." And my son, he laughed. He says, "This is 30 years ago. That's like now. That's 2015. That's basically now. And there's no flying cars, Daddy. you know, and nobody wears goofy clothes like the futuristic clothes, and the kid's right, you know. If you think about it, all throughout, like ever since the car was invented, we've heard fantastic predictions of motorways in the sky and flying cars. It's been all of our literature and our films and all the inventors. Everybody's been talking about it for 125 years. But you know, where are the flying cars? The motorways in the sky. And here we are today, realizing that a 19th century invention, the humble bicycle, is the key to solving 21st century traffic problems. And I like that irony, and I like the poetry in that. So the screenwriters of this film got it wrong, but they also kind of got, the makeup department got it wrong as well, because this is what they thought Michael J. Fox would look like at the age of 47 on the left in the film, but this is what the guy actually looks like today. So, you know, I just like to think that we should all take it with a grain of salt. All of these fantastic predictions of the future, all this kind of Jules Verne kind of images of how society will be, and we should apply a little bit of rationality. I'm going to probably say the word rationality quite often as well today. The point of departure for this talk today is a little bit grim. This highlights the problem. People are dying in great numbers. 35,000 people a year in the European Union alone, 35,000 in America, 30,000 now in Brazil, killed by automobiles on our roads and our streets. You add to these numbers the deaths caused by pollution and by illnesses caused by lack of physical activity. You've all heard this before, but if you add those numbers to it, you know, it gets even more shocking. What it is really, it's a 9/11 every single month, and every single month for the past 60 years, but there's not really, hasn't been any concerted war on this terror. You know, it's something that we've just accepted the status quo of 35,000 lives lost every year in our own backyard, as well as all the people who are injured. Now, I believe that the main reason is that a century of traffic engineering has failed us. The sum of our knowledge after 100 years of traffic engineering, apart from the fact that cars are still killing people in our cities and the countryside, is that there is no way to ease congestion. If you create more space for cars, more cars come. This is what we have learned in 100 years. And if you think about the time and the money and the lives that we have invested in a century just to arrive at this simple fact, it really hammers home the point that traffic engineering has had its day. First of all, I want to look at the streets. For 7,000 years, streets were extensions of our homes. The space in which we met each other, transported ourselves, bought and sold our goods, where our children played. They were the most democratic spaces in the history of Homo sapiens. This has changed in just a few decades. Now we see that many people here and all around the world have this perception that the streets were designed or invented solely for the automobile. The car was invented and the streets fell out of the sky to provide a space for them. This is the perception that many people have around the world. Now, two main things happened to cause this massive paradigm shift in our perception of streets. First of all, in the rapid urbanization of the late 1800s and the early 1900s, engineers were the heroes of the day, the urban heroes. They were solving any and all problems that cities were throwing at them with all of these people moving to them. And they did fantastically, and engineers continue today to do a brilliant job in our cities. The problem was that the automobile appeared on the urban landscape. It was invented. And that was a game changer, really, for cities. Nobody knew how to tackle the traffic safety problems, and there were big traffic safety problems. People were dying in even greater numbers back then when the automobile appeared on our streets. Engineers were handed the task, almost out of desperation, because nobody else knew what to do. And basically, overnight, the streets of our cities became regarded as public utilities, like sewers, electricity, like water supply, puzzles to be solved with mathematical equations for the first time in 7,000 years. What else happened was that the automobile industry, they had a bit of a problem. They had these new shiny products to sell, and yet everybody hated them. This was something they call the anti-automobile age, when the automobile first appeared in our cities. Motorists were despised. Cars were detested. You know, if you ran over and killed a kid on a street, you could almost get lynched out of your car in most cities in America. The automobile industry knew that they needed to fix this, you know, and what they did was really, they started to use marketing and spin and good old-fashioned ridicule to start changing people's perceptions. And this is, you know how the automobile industry excels at selling their products today, all the different commercials we see for cars. This is where they really realized how to do it. They started campaigns against what they called jaywalking. A jay, in the American slang of the day, was it was kind of a negative term for somebody from the countryside who shows up in the city and didn't really know the ways of the big, cool city. So they invented this phrase called jaywalking. Crossing the street in the middle of a block. They had Boy Scouts hand out flyers to people who were trying to cross the street in the middle of the block. After 7,000 years, this habit, all of a sudden it was not acceptable in our cities. Anybody who was against cars was labeled as old-fashioned, stand in the way of progress. You're against cars? Come on, grandpa, this is the future of mobility. And these were very effective techniques. Those of us who live in cities don't want to be regarded as old-fashioned. If you live in a city, you kind of want to be with it. You want to have your finger on the pulse. So these were very effective techniques. Pedestrians were herded up to the street corners to use these newly designed things called crosswalks. Children were shepherded into these newly invented things called playgrounds. The playground as we know it today, this little zoological garden into which you throw your child, this was an invention of the automobile industry in America to get the kids off the streets and to keep the damn mothers happy, because the mothers are the worst. They won't shut up. So as soon as the playgrounds were invented and the crosswalks were designed and defined, the streets were clear of these irritating, squishy obstacles, and really the stage was set for the greatest paradigm shift in the history of our cities. Now, if you look long and hard at it, the way that we, in the cities around the world, we live in cities controlled by mathematical models. Many of them bizarre and outdated. Some of the models that controlled our traffic in our cities are from like the 1960s. Cost-benefit analyses, feasibility studies, statistics, numbers, data. Sometimes it makes me feel like I'm just a character in another film, The Matrix, against my will. Cities around the world can't put in a simple cycle track based on best practice, widen a sidewalk, traffic calm a neighborhood, lower the speed limits, because it doesn't fit into the computer models down in the engineering department. This happens far too often. So many great ideas die on this doorstep. Now we need a way out of the matrix. Time is short. Urbanization is peaking once again as it did 100 years ago. We need to think differently. And here are two things that I think can help us remaster our cities and look at our cities differently. Firstly, something that we all share, everybody in this room, everybody we know, basic human observation. Call it anthropology or sociology, that's fine, but what it is just a bunch of people looking at what another bunch of people do. It's direct human observation is sort of the more academic term. This is an intersection in Copenhagen. It's on the world's busiest bicycle street, but the city of Copenhagen noticed that a couple hundred, maybe about 1,000 cyclists a day were cutting across a sidewalk at this bottleneck on the street to go to a parallel street, because they were going to another part of the city and they were also trying to avoid the bicycle rush hour, which is really intense in the morning. So what to do? You can either hand out fines to these people for riding on the sidewalks, or you can do what the city of Copenhagen, to their credit, did. They decided to watch and observe and accept the fact that there must be a very good reason for the behavior of these few citizens in our city. A temporary bike lane was put in place on the sidewalk. The results were gathered. And finally, a permanent cycle track on the right-hand side was put into place. The desire lines of just a few hundred of our citizens were respected. Infrastructure was put into place to accommodate them. And desire lines, really, it's the most beautiful expression in urban planning. And it came from the French philosopher Gaston Bachelard in his book, The Poetics of Space, in the 1950s. But it really describes all cities were based on desire lines. The winding streets of Luxembourg, it was all desire lines from when the first person started to wander into the neighborhood with sheep, following pathways. The pathways were formed and now they became city streets. Desire lines are democracy in action and democracy in motion. I really like desire lines. If I had to have a hobby, this is probably what it is. This is the view from my hotel room in Halifax in Canada last year. There was fresh snow on the common, the park in the heart of the city. The green lines are the original pathways, perfect for 19th century promenading on a Sunday or going for a run or walking your dog. But the red lines show you where the people of the modern Halifax were walking in the morning rush hour and riding their bike as well, carving desire lines straight as arrows through the snow from the neighborhoods to the city center. A modern city would observe and redesign accordingly, because 19th century planning doesn't always apply in 2013. Things change along the way.